only mode.
Alright, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for our carb counting webinar. We're lucky enough to have Jane Karpavicius, the Dietitian Team Leader at Diabetes Australia Vic, to present the webinar for us. Just before we begin, and so I can check that you can hear us, could you please click the raise hand button if you have taken part in a webinar before? Thank you for raising your hands. We will have approximately 15 minutes for questions at the end of the presentation. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please type it into the question box and select Send to Staff option. Now I will hand over to Jane, who will begin tonight's webinar. I hope you enjoy it, and we're happy to answer any questions that might arise from the presentation. Thanks.
Well, good evening, everyone. Yes, thank you, Eliza, for that lovely introduction. I hope all of you have had dinner and you're all relaxed in front of your computer screen. It's nice to see a few familiar names who have joined the webinar tonight. I might have met you along the track somewhere, so that's it's really nice to see. So tonight's webinar on carbohydrate counting is aimed at people with type 1 diabetes. Now, I think you will all have different levels of knowledge, but hopefully you'll all learn something from tonight. You will need a calculator if you'd like to take part in a couple of the activities that I've got planned for later on. So you might like to have one close by, either on your phone or an actual calculator. So just the outline of the webinar, and we'll be talking about the different types of carbohydrate counting, how to count carbohydrates from a label, some tips for eating out, and also some resources such as apps that can make life much easier when calculating carbohydrates. So firstly, we can't forget the healthy eating guidelines. We can't just focus on carbohydrates in a food because, like everyone, you still need to care for your overall health. There's no such thing as a diabetic diet. The dietary advice for people with diabetes is no different to that that's recommended for all Australians. Our advice is based on the new dietary guidelines that were released last year. And they recommend to enjoy a variety of nutritious foods, to limit foods that are high in saturated fat, added salt, sugars and alcohol, to replace saturated fat with unsaturated fats, and to have regular meals. Snacks are of course optional, but some people will need them, with suitable portions, and eating a low GI carbohydrate food with your meal may also provide an additional benefit. The difference for people with type 1 diabetes is the need to balance insulin dose and carbohydrate intake. It's the carbohydrate portion of food which we know has the biggest impact on blood glucose levels. So by counting your carbohydrates, you will be able to more accurately determine your insulin dose. We know that carbohydrate is the preferred fuel for the body, especially the brain, and it's recommended that we consume a minimum of 130 grams of carbohydrate per day because we know that this is the amount of carbohydrate that's required to fuel our central nervous system without relying on glucose production from anywhere else. Now, some people might like to eat less carbohydrate than that, and that's still okay, but I would recommend that you have your diet checked with your dietitian just to make sure that you're still eating all of the required nutrients. Now, the first step is to know what foods contain carbohydrates. It isn't uncommon for me to see someone who has had diabetes for quite some time who still doesn't recognise all the carbohydrate foods. So first of all, let's revisit the basics. There are different types of carbohydrates. Firstly, we have our dairy foods, and the carbohydrate in dairy foods is called lactose. All fruit, dried fruit, fresh fruit, tinned fruit, and fruit juice contains a carbohydrate called fructose. Foods made from grains and flour like bread and bread products, cereal, other grains like quinoa and rice, and also pasta are starchy carbohydrates. And then other starch products are things like potato, sweet potato, yam and taro, corn and legumes. Finally, we have our sweet carbohydrate foods like lollies, chocolate, soft drink and cordial, and they contain a carbohydrate called sucrose. Now, when each of these carbohydrate foods is broken down in the stomach, they are released into the bloodstream as glucose. So it doesn't matter what type of carbohydrate it is, they are all released into the bloodstream as glucose. There are some foods which don't contain any carbohydrates and some which only contain very small amounts, which won't make much difference to your blood glucose levels unless you eat a lot of them. So these are our non-starchy vegetables like green vegetables and salads, so tomato, carrots, mushrooms and cauliflower. Our protein foods don't contain carbohydrate either, things like meat, fish, eggs and cheese. Now you'll notice that cheese is actually a dairy food, but it belongs on this in this category with the foods that don't contain any carbohydrate because the carbohydrate's actually been removed and you're left with just the fats and the protein. We have to also be careful with crumbing and batter, so fish that's been battered will have some carbohydrate, and the same with meat or things like a chicken schnitzel where it's got crumbing. We also need to count the carbohydrates there. Other foods that don't contain carbohydrate are fats and oils, margarine, butter and cream. Nuts. Now, if you're anyone like me, and I like to sit down with a bowl of nuts, the more that you eat, the more you'll have to start thinking about counting your carbohydrates. But if it's only a small amount, it shouldn't matter. Some fruits like strawberries, lemon, lime, passion fruit, and also rhubarb don't contain any carbohydrates. And flavour enhancers like mustard, vinegar, garlic, soy sauce, herbs and spices, and some fluids as well like black tea, diet soft drink, or diet cordial. So how do we count carbohydrates? There are different ways to count them. They can be measured in single gram increments, so 1 gram, or 10 gram carbohydrate portions, or CPs they're called. And the DAPHNE program uses CPs, so DAPHNE stands for Dose Adjustment for Normal Eating, and I've got a slide on the DAPHNE program a little later. But the DAPHNE program uses 10 grams because it's easy to divide when working out insulin to carbohydrate ratios. Some people like to count in exchanges, so 15 gram amounts of carbohydrate. And the 15 gram often relates better to actual food portions that are consumed. For example, one exchange would be 1 apple rather than 1 CP or carbohydrate portion, which would be 2/3 of an apple. So it's a better indication of a whole food. So how does it work? Because you take insulin to cover the food that you consume, the aim is to match your carbohydrate amount and your insulin dose. Now, if your insulin doses are set or fixed and you don't change them, then it's important to have the same amount of carbohydrate with each meal and snack. So for example, if you always have 10 units of Nova Rapid at breakfast, then you should always have the same total amount of carbohydrate at breakfast. Or you might have a fixed pre-mixed insulin regimen, such as Mixtard 3070, where again the insulin dose doesn't change with your food. Now in the example I've got here on the slide, the person takes the same amount of insulin each day for all meals, and you can see that the dinner dose is slightly higher than breakfast and lunch. The amount of carbohydrate will also need to be the same to match each dose of insulin. Just like that. So with fixed insulin doses, learning how to count carbohydrates will allow you to have the same total amount of carbohydrate at a meal, but you can choose to eat different types of foods from day to day. With flexible insulin doses, you can have an insulin to carbohydrate ratio, and so then you're able to work out how much insulin to dose for an amount of carbohydrate. And ratios are used with insulin pumps and also with multiple daily injections. Your diabetes educator or endocrinologist will help you to calculate your insulin to carbohydrate ratio. An example of a flexible insulin therapy is the DAPHNE program, and as I mentioned, I'll talk about that a little later. Now the example on the screen shows that if this person wanted to eat a larger dinner than usual, then they would use their insulin to carbohydrate ratio to determine how much insulin they would need to cover that amount of carbohydrate. Now let's start at looking at exchanges. An exchange is the quantity of food that contains approximately 15 grams of carbohydrate. An exchange list can be obtained from your dietitian and also in this book here on the screen called the Australian Carbohydrate Counter. Everyone with type 1 diabetes will find exchanges useful to learn, and I'll show you why in a moment. But some common exchanges are 1 slice of sandwich-sized bread, 1 hand-sized fruit or 2 smaller pieces of fruit, so like kiwi fruit or 2 little mandarins would be 1 exchange. 1/2 cup of cooked pasta or noodles, or 1/3 cup of cooked rice, 3/4 cup of a dry flaked cereal or 1.5 wheat bix, 1 cup of milk, a small potato, and when we say a small potato, it's just bigger than egg size, so just larger than a large egg, or 15 medium hot chips would be 1 exchange, 2 plain sweet biscuits, a tub of diet yogurt or about 100 grams of a fruit-flavoured yogurt, or 4 to 6 small crackers. There are 5 exchange foods which we call anchor foods, and if you know that what these are, it can be very handy to make estimations of carbohydrate dishes when you are eating out. So as an example, if you know that 1 slice of bread has about 15 grams of carbohydrate, then you can make an estimate at the carbohydrates here in this focaccia. Similarly, if you know that 1/2 cup of cooked pasta contains about 15 grams of carbohydrate, then if you're at a barbecue and eating this pasta here on the right hand side, you can make an estimate of how much carbohydrate is on your plate. Knowing a medium-sized apple has got about 15 grams of carbohydrate will provide you with a starting point for this apple crumble. So do you think you've got a whole apple in your bowl, and then you use that as a base, so 15 grams, and then you'd add extra for the crumble and the sugar. 1/3 cup of cooked rice is another useful exchange to know, and you can estimate if you're eating out how much rice is in this sushi here on your plate. And finally, if you're out for breakfast as an example, knowing that 1 cup of milk as an exchange will provide you with a starting point for this smoothie. So the exchange system can be used as a method of carbohydrate counting. Your carbohydrate regimen, for example, might be 3 exchanges for breakfast and 4 exchanges at lunch and dinner if you're on a fixed regimen, or otherwise you might have a ratio. If you're counting carbohydrates using the exchange method, then it's important for people with type 1 diabetes to use half exchanges just to be a little bit more accurate. Half exchanges are calculated from 15 grams plus or minus 3 grams. So you can see that if a food contains between 7 and 11 grams of carbohydrate, then it is half an exchange. If a food contains between 12 and 15 grams of carbohydrate, it's counted as one exchange, and so on. So just an example here. Now we'll talk about label reading in a moment, but to give you an example of using exchanges with labels, this label here shows that there are 21.2 grams of carbohydrate per serve, and if we divide this by 15, you get 1.5 exchanges, or if we use the list above, then we'd get the same answer. 21.2 grams of carbohydrate would be 1.5 exchanges. Now here are some tools which you'll need for carbohydrate counting, not tonight, but they are useful to have. A set of scales. Now ideally a set of scales which would easily fit a dinner plate so that the number is still visible and it's not hidden under the plate. It's not hidden by the plate. Some measuring cups, a calculator, and many phones now have calculators anyway. A carbohydrate counting book, and there are also some great apps, and we'll talk about some of these apps a little later on. So how are you going to work out the carbohydrates you are going to have for dinner if this is your plate? So the first thing is to identify the carbohydrate foods or components that are on the plate, and then you'd weigh the carbohydrate food, and then you'd calculate the carbohydrate in the meal using a carbohydrate counter, so a book or a website, or use the nutrition information panel if the food has actually come from a packet. Now, if your meal or part of your meal has come from a packet, you can use the nutrition information panel that's on the label to work out the amount of carbohydrate. Now, when using a label, don't use the sugars or try adding the total carbohydrates and sugars together. You need to use the total carbohydrate. The total carbohydrate on a label represents all the starches and the natural sugars and added sugars that are in the product. The sugars is only the total amount of natural and added sugars, so you would be missing out on any starch that might be in the product if you use the sugars instead of the total carbohydrate. Now you'll see that there is a per serve column which shows you the nutrition for the amount of food the manufacturer has called a serve, and in this case it's 33 grams. Labels also list the nutrition for 100 grams of the food, and that column can be really useful. So use the amount per serve column for individual food items like biscuits, bars, or an individual yogurt tub if you plan on eating the serve size that's listed on the nutrition information panel, but the per 100 gram column is useful for whole food items like rice, pasta, cereal, or if your serve size is actually different from what's written on the label. Often though, the amount of food you are eating is different from the amount that is listed on the packet or in a carbohydrate counting book. And this equation can be used for working out the grams of carbohydrate in your portion of food. So the equation is C divided by W multiplied by Y, and C is the carbohydrates that are in the reference food. So the reference food might be from a food label, or a carbohydrate counter, or maybe even a website. The weight is the weight of the reference food, and the Y stands for the weight of your food, your serving size. And a good little hint with this equation as well is that the C, or the carbohydrates in the reference food, is always smaller than the weight of the reference food. So the carbohydrates can never be bigger, obviously, than the weight of the reference foods. So the little c is always on top. Okay, so this is where you're going to need your calculators. So let's give this a try, and we can have a practice of this one. So we've weighed our portion of cereal, and the weight of our cereal is 47 grams. Now let's try using the cereal label here and the carbohydrate counting equation, and I'll pop that up for you, to work out how much carbohydrate is in your serve, and I'll just give you a moment to give that a go. Okay, so you're going to use the carbohydrates in the reference food, which in this case is 70.8, divided by the weight of the reference food, which is 100 grams because I've taken it from the per 100 gram column, multiplied by your served weight, which is 47 grams, and the amount of carbohydrate in that serve is 33 grams of carbohydrate. Now, there is another way of doing that. Some of you might have done that a little bit differently. If you chose to use the per serve column, your equation would look like this instead. So 21.2, so the total carbohydrates in the per serve column, divided by the weight of the reference food, which is in this case 30 grams, multiplied again by your serve size, which is 47 grams, and you end up with the same result. So it's just important to remember that the carbohydrate is taken from the same column as your reference food weight. So 21.2 we took from the 30 gram column, and 70.8 we took from the per 100 gram column. So either way that you do it, you'll end up with the same answer. Now with cereal, of course, we need to remember to also add the carbohydrate from the milk or the yogurt that you also might be adding to your cereal. Now what if you've bought a loaf of bread from the market? It isn't sliced and it comes in a white paper bag. It doesn't have a nutritional information panel. So what you do is you cut your 2 slices of bread and you weigh them. So you've weighed them together and they weigh 78 grams. And you can use a carbohydrate counter to determine the amount of carbohydrate in foods which don't have a nutrition information panel. So a carbohydrate counter will show you many different types of food. They also often show energy in calories or kilojoules, fat, and of course carbohydrate. So the first thing that we do is look up your type of bread. In this case it's white bread. And then you use exactly the same equation that we were using before to work out how many grams of carbohydrate in your 2 slices of bread. So again, I'll just give you a moment to have a go at that one. Okay, how did you go? We'll go through that together. So the carbohydrate in the reference food, so I've used the plain thin sliced bread and it's 14 grams of carbohydrate divided by the weight of the reference food. In this case, it's 30 grams. You see there, plain thin sliced 30 grams. Multiplied by your serve weight, which is 78 grams. And the amount of carbohydrate in the serve of our bread is 36 grams of carbohydrate. Not too hard. Okay, there are a few ways to make your everyday routine a little easier whilst maintaining your carbohydrate accuracy. So for an example, if you have cereal for breakfast, weigh your usual portion and calculate the carbohydrates from the label. Then find a container, a mug or a measuring cup which fits your cereal portion exactly. And then you can use this container every day instead of weighing and calculating your serve each morning. And it's a good idea to write down which container you are using somewhere just in case one morning you wake up and you've forgotten. You can do the same with the milk. Put a mark on a jug or write down your calculated milk measure somewhere so you don't forget. But just remember that cereals are not all the same, so your measurement for one type of cereal may not be able to be used for another. For example, muesli has got a lot more carbohydrate than cornflakes. So you will need to use different containers for different cereals, or different measurements. Now, there's no reason to rely on packet foods just because they have a nutrition panel, and that is something that we also see. You can still bake at home, and often it's healthier than the store-bought version anyway. So to carbohydrate count a recipe, the first thing that you'd need to do is identify the carbohydrate foods. In this case, it's the currants, the caster sugar, and the wholemeal self-raising flour. And by the way, this is an actual recipe and it's very nice. And then we'd use a carbohydrate counting book to calculate the amount of carbohydrate in each of these ingredients. So we're not going to do it right now, but you'd use exactly the same equation that we're using before. You might get the carbohydrates for the currants off the actual packets or the label. In the caster sugar and the wholemeal flour you may need to get from a carbohydrate counting book or a website. And then you add up the total carbohydrates in the recipe, and this recipe in total contains 360 grams of carbohydrate. Now, to work out the amount of carbohydrate in your piece or your slice of this loaf, you can do one of two things. You either slice the loaf into even slices and then divide the total carbohydrates in the loaf, which in this case is 360 grams, by the number of slices. And in this case, I've divided it into 14 slices. And then we work out that each of the 14 slices will have approximately 26 grams of carbohydrate in it. Now, another way, if you don't want to slice your loaf all at once, and sometimes it does dry out, so this may be a better option, is to weigh the slice that you've cut off. So just as an example, in this case it's 43 grams, and use the same carbohydrate counting equation as we did before. So again, I might give you just a moment, see if you can do this one. All the information is right there in front of you, so I'll just give you a quick moment. Okay, so again, the carbohydrates in the reference food is 360 grams divided by the weight, which is 520 grams, multiplied by the weight of your serve, which is 43 grams, and the amount of carbohydrate in your piece of this loaf would be 30 grams of carbohydrate. Now, it's a good idea to write down the carbohydrate of your favorite recipe so you don't need to work them out each time, either on the recipe itself, or you might keep a record in an address book, because once you've worked out the carbohydrates in a recipe once, then you shouldn't need to repeat it unless the ingredients actually change over time, which can happen. Now, when you're eating out, carbohydrate counting can be made easier by planning ahead. Look up the dish you are likely to order before you leave. You could use the Calorie King app, a book or a website as a guide because it contains many commonly consumed takeaway and restaurant foods. It's also a good idea to keep a record of what happened last time so that you can fine-tune for the next occasion. So you might record the meal and the amount of carbohydrate that you estimated, the amount of insulin that you took, and also your blood glucose level 2 to 3 hours after the meal. And again, you might use an address book to keep a record of this. So all of your Thai foods could go under T in an address book, so that's where you might put this pad Thai. You could also take a photo on your phone of the serve size and use this as to guide your estimation for next time. And if there's a food that you commonly eat and you get it really wrong, then it's worth taking it home and weighing it to work out the carbohydrates more accurately. And of course, as I mentioned before, exchanges can be really useful when you are eating out. Being familiar with some visual estimations of carbohydrate foods can help. So, for example, know what 1 cup or 100 grams of cooked rice, pasta, or noodles looks like on a plate. And some handy hints are that 1 cup of cooked rice, pasta or noodles is about the size of a tennis ball or a closed fist, and your hands are very useful because we take them everywhere with us. We know that a cup of pasta is about 30 grams of carbohydrate, and a cup of rice, cooked rice, is 45 grams of carbohydrate. 10 hot chips, 10 to 15 hot chips or one small potato we know is 15 grams of carbohydrate. A slice of thin crust pizza is approximately the size of a piece of bread, depending of course on the thicker crust, which would be 15 grams of carbohydrate. Then we have the thick crust pizza is more likely to be 25 grams of carbohydrate. A medium schnitzel or a battered piece of fish is approximately 30 grams of carbohydrate, depending of course on the size as well. Or one sushi roll would be approximately 30 grams of carbohydrate. Now, most fast food chains and food stores have the nutrition information on their website or behind the counter. Then you don't have to even estimate. So the more information that you can gather, the easier it's going to be. Now, cocktail parties and gatherings where food isn't plated all at once in front of you can make carbohydrate counting particularly tricky. People with an insulin pump can give themselves a continuous or a square wave bolus where the insulin is delivered at a set rate over a specified period of time, and your diabetes educator will be able to help you with this. For people who use insulin pens, though, there is no consensus on the best way to manage that. You could try gathering a few items on the plate and then counting the carbohydrates of them all together, but again, your diabetes team will be able to help you devise a plan for these situations. Seeing as we're talking about eating out, I thought I'd put a little section in here on alcohol. The recommendations for alcohol consumption for people with diabetes are exactly the same as for people without diabetes, and that is that you should consume no more than 2 standard drinks per day, with some alcohol-free days each week. Now, the main concern with drinking alcohol is the risk of hypos, which can be delayed and they can be quite severe as well, especially if you're drinking large amounts of alcohol, and also after exercise, if you're drinking after playing sport. And hypos occur because the release of glucose from the liver is stopped whilst the alcohol is being metabolized by the body. There are some alcoholic drinks which also contain carbohydrates, such as beer, cider, drinks mixed with soft drink or juice, sweet wines, and some liquors such as Maduri, Baileys and Kahlua. And alcohol that contains carbohydrate may still cause an initial rise in blood glucose levels, but there is still that potential for a hypo to occur later on, and really you should talk to your diabetes educator for specific advice around managing your blood glucose levels when drinking alcoholic drinks that contain carbohydrates. Probably the most important thing, though, to remember when you're drinking alcohol is to monitor your blood glucose levels frequently. And you should also always eat carbohydrate-containing foods at the same time as drinking alcohol to reduce the risk of having a hypo. Okay, back to carbohydrate counting. Now, how accurate do we need to be? Well, small discrepancies in the calculated compared to the actual amount of carbohydrate is unlikely to have much of an effect on your blood glucose levels, but Carmel Smart did a study, and she showed that discrepancies of up to 10 grams won't have a major impact on blood glucose levels. So, looking at these plates of spaghetti on the screen, if you estimated your carbohydrate to be 70 grams, but the actual amount was 60 grams, then it wouldn't make much difference. But if you estimated 80 grams and it was actually 60 grams of carbohydrate, then you would see an effect on your blood glucose levels. In some situations, it can be very difficult to be accurate, but a best estimate is better than a rough guess. We can also only be as accurate as the information that we've been provided with. So the Australian New Zealand Food Standards Code actually anticipates a 20 to 45% variation in the reported nutrient content on the label and the actual nutrient content of a food. So that's not making things very easy for us at all. But a recent study weighed slices of bread in a loaf and compared the amount of carbohydrate in each slice to the amount that was listed on the label per serve, and they found variations of up to 12.3 grams of carbohydrate, so almost an exchange. So the amount of carbohydrate listed on a label represents the carbohydrate content of the average slice of bread only, and we know that a crust might be a little bit thinner and a little bit sort of smaller, I guess, than a slice from the middle. So we can only be as accurate, really, as the information that we're provided with. Weighing foods might be a better option. So better accuracy, of course, is going to give you better blood glucose control. Monitoring of your blood glucose levels will also help to assess your accuracy. You really need to be confident with those foods that you eat regularly, but we know that carbohydrate counting is a skill that requires a lot of practice. There are some situations where things can go wrong with carbohydrate counting, so counting the grams of the weighted food instead of the grams of carbohydrate, so putting an apple on a scale and seeing 78 grams is the weight of the food, not the carbohydrate grams of the food. So some people can get that wrong. Also forgetting to zero the scales. If you're weighing that cereal in your bowl, you need to put the bowl on first. Zero the scales to be weighing just the cereal portion. You don't want to be weighing the bowl as well. Confusion between ounces and grams on the scales, raw versus cooked foods, problems with label reading, and also using a calculator. Also, foods which we typically think of as carbohydrate-free might need to be counted if a large enough serve is eaten. So, for example, a glass of tomato juice has actually got about 11 grams of carbohydrate in it, whereas if we just have tomato in a salad, we wouldn't usually count for it. Nuts, so half a cup of nuts, about 70 grams, is 12 grams of carbohydrate, so again, almost an exchange. And tomato soup, so half a can or 210 grams there, has got 26.5 grams of carbohydrates. So that wouldn't just be coming from the tomato. Obviously, there'd be other thickeners and things in there as well, but we can't assume that all tomato-based foods are actually free of carbohydrates. We also know that portions can change over time, so we recommend that you review your portions every 3 to 6 months. The ingredient list may also be altered over time, so it's a good idea to revisit your portions and reweigh things. Some good resources for carbohydrate counting are our fat, fibre and carbohydrate counter. You can buy that either at our Elizabeth Street retail store, or you can also buy it online. Of course, it's a little bit cheaper and free postage for DAVIC members. The carbohydrate counter that I mentioned before with the exchanges in it is the Australian Carbohydrate Counter. Again, you can buy this online or through our store. And finally, the Calorie, Fat and Carbohydrate Counter by Alan Boracek is available at most newsagents, and we are working to get it here in our store as well, but that's got commonly listed consumed foods and it's very good with brands of foods as well, so it's quite comprehensive. I quite like using that one. Of course, we've got some apps available now. So Calorie King, so that book I just showed you, is an app on Apple. It's a free app, and the good thing with Calorie King is that you can actually change the serving size of your portion of food as well. So it does all the calculations and the maths for you. So that's a nice, easy one. Easy Diet Diary is also a free Apple app, and the Australian Carbohydrate Counter Traffic Light Guide is not free, but that's the other book that I just showed you that can be downloaded onto Apple Android or BlackBerry. In terms of bolusing for fat and protein, this is an emerging area of research. Some people find that fat and protein may increase blood glucose levels, so some people report that if they have just a very plain omelette for breakfast with no carbohydrates, that they still see a rise in their blood glucose levels. Now, we know that carbohydrate is still the key factor, and that it is the current recommendation for determining blood glucose levels in terms of counting, and extra insulin for protein or fat may be required by some individuals, but we also know that you may be at an increased risk of a hypo if you do bolus for them. So it is an emerging area of research, and you really need to self-monitor your blood glucose levels for an individual response, and again your diabetes team might be able to give you a little bit more information and individualised advice. So just in summary, the total carbohydrate amount for deciding insulin bolus best predicts blood glucose response. Current evidence does not suggest giving extra insulin for fat or protein, and it is recommended to monitor individual blood glucose levels for tailoring your insulin bolus types. We know that carbohydrate counting is time-consuming and doesn't require a lot of skill as well. A lot of maths is involved in those calculations and also label reading. It is difficult to be precise, but if you find that your motivation is waning, that you really should get in touch with your diabetes team and use them for support. Carb counting certainly does get easier with practice. I'll just note a couple of programs that may be of interest to you. They can assist. So the carbohydrate counting workshops for pumps and bolus calculators that we run at Diabetes Australia. We've got one coming up in Geelong on the 14th of May, another one here at Elizabeth Street on the 17th of July and the 6th of November, and that's a hands-on workshop conducted by us, the dietitians. It's a half-day workshop. And of course there's a discount if you are a Diabetes Australia Victoria member, and if you'd like to book in for one of those workshops, you can call the 1300 number at the bottom of the screen there. The Daphne program, so Dose Adjustment for Normal Eating program, is a 5-day program for adults with type 1 diabetes. They've also introduced a new format for the program this year, so you used to only be able to have the option of 5 consecutive days, so Monday to Friday, and now they're offering 5 by 1 days, so 5 consecutive Fridays instead, so you might find that that's easier to fit in with your schedule. More information can be found on the Daphne website, or you could email them if you've got any questions, or you can call Suze on 9667 1719 if you'd like to have a chat to her anything further about the program. And that's it from me, Eliza. I think there's a couple of questions that have come through. I've just left our information line up there, the 1300 136 588. If anyone wants to actually call and talk to a dietitian or a diabetes educator, we have got someone available all throughout the week to chat to you.
Thank you for such a useful and engaging presentation, Jane. I'll just let you read those questions first so you can pull some answers together. If anyone has any other questions, please feel free to send them through. And thank you for your questions. Like Jane said, if you have any more specific ones, please use the info line. I'll just pass you back over to Jane.
Thanks, Eliza. So, yep, some really interesting questions have come through. So I've got one here that says, any advice for someone on an insulin pump going away, so overseas or on a cruise where you can't weigh or measure your food? So it might be buffet style, or again, sort of you're going back to those sort of foods that you're not so familiar with, and all I can recommend is to continue to monitor your blood glucose levels continually if you are eating foods that aren't familiar to you, and try to learn those exchanges before you go away, because then you've got some idea. It will help you, will give you a tool for carb counting when you're away. Using the apps, most people have got iPhones now, or another device where you can just quickly log into an app and look up a food. As I mentioned, the Calorie King app we find is really, really useful. And yeah, just eyeballing portion sizes. Unfortunately, that's sort of the best that we can do. I hope I've answered your question there. The second question here is that I thought the idea was to match insulin to carbohydrates and not carbohydrates to insulin, and that's exactly correct. So we like to give people flexibility in their eating habits in their food, and ideally your insulin dose should be matched to your carbohydrate intake and not the other way around, and that's the beauty of using an insulin to carbohydrate ratio. So it doesn't matter how much of a carbohydrate that you eat, you can still match your dose of insulin to cover that certain amount of carbohydrate. Another question here in terms of the glycemic index, so bolusing for high and low GI foods. There's no rules around this either. It really is individual, so all we'd recommend that you do is to continue to monitor your blood glucose levels to see what change or effect takes place after you have a high or low GI food. If you're on a pump, it can make it a little bit easier. We know that high carbohydrate, high fat foods, where the fat actually delays the digestion of the carbohydrates into the system, there are pump settings that can help you with that as well. Can a person with type 1 diabetes go on a very low carbohydrate diet to lose weight? My suggestion in regards to that would be, again, just to make sure that you're in contact with your diabetes team. Very low carbohydrate meals and meal plans like OptiFast and the like can be done, but it really requires a lot of monitoring by your diabetes team just to make sure not only that your diet's still adequate in terms of all of your nutrients, but also so that they can manipulate or change up your insulin dose. I think there's another one here. Is there much of a difference between grams and meals? I only have scales for grams. So if you've got a scale that's got grams on it, that's perfect, because most of the carbohydrate counters have actually got grams listed in them, so you should be able to use that equation that we were using tonight to calculate the amount of carbohydrate in all of your foods. And in terms of webinars on working out insulin to carbohydrate ratios, I would recommend a program, so either the Daphne program or Baker IDI also do another program called Flexit, but that's where we can assist you in working out your insulin to carbohydrate ratio. So I would certainly look into the Daphne program if you are wanting to use a ratio.
Thanks, Jane. Thank you, everyone, for all your comments. There's been a lot of comments and a few more questions. I will attempt to get back to everyone after speaking to Jane further about those, but it's hard to answer each of the questions that are quite individual at this webinar. But so that now that concludes our webinar, I'll be sending out an email in the next couple of days with a link to an online survey to evaluate tonight's webinar. So if you could please complete the survey, that would be much appreciated, as it will help us plan future webinars for you. Also, my details will be in the email, and please contact me with suggested topics for future webinars. Also, although nothing beats being able to participate and ask questions, if you would like to access any part of this webinar again, a full recording will be available in the members section of the DAVIC website. So everyone asking whether they can see slides again, please keep an eye out on the membership website. Thanks again for joining us. Have a lovely night. Bye.